What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Ryan Moody, Jimmy Smith, our MMA show. Probably the one you've all been waiting for. This is Jimmy, the first one where I went to the pre-fight show and people actually posted, like, where's the post-fight show? Like, they wanted this. They were yearning for this.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow, we're building a fan base. It's crazy.
We are. We're building something. I don't know if it's fan base. But we're going to actually detour just a bit because I know we only do main card breakdowns, but Roxanne Modafferi, Maycee Barber. To be fair, we did mention this in the pre-show that we thought it was a bit odd that this was not bumped up for Kelleher and Osborne, which obviously we'll get to as well. But there was a sequence in this fight at the end. Number one, if you didn't watch it, and a very entertaining fight. If you want to see, kind of the David versus Goliath aspect from a betting standpoint, you can watch this. Roxanne did an incredible job. But at post-fight, where it was blatantly clear at this point that Roxanne had won. In fact, one judge had a 10-8 round, so there was really no question. We had an issue where when Joe Rogan went into the cage, Maycee Barber kind of positioned herself to where she could pull Joe Rogan aside before he actually spoke to Roxanne, who had won, and to her point, gave a very well-composed, appreciative, and thankful speech. But I didn't really get bothered by this. However, I did see a large amount of people online, which, where we know emotions tend to live, that were upset that the losing fighter had interjected prior to the winning fighter be interviewed. And traditionally, no one needs to tell you, you do have the winner, and then generally in a main event, you have the loser interviewed, unless there's something special, like a retirement or something along those lines. So I don't know that I'd seen this happen before. And I guess it is, something people could be upset about. Do you ever have anybody interject like that while you were actually doing an interview? And what did you think about this whole situation?
No, I haven't. Yeah, and it's just, like I said, she didn't say anything disrespectful or inappropriate or anything like that. But cutting yourself in front of the winner is inappropriate. Is in a way disrespectful. That act is disrespectful. And so her issue was probably you're the main event of the prelim, so they're probably going straight to the pay-per-view after you. You're not going to get a chance to talk, generally speaking, unless there's something crazy going on. Everybody in the production truck was going, okay, main event time. I'm sorry, main card time. Let's get out of Dodge. They want to get rid of everything they haven't spoken about. Go from ESPN to pay-per-view. They don't usually have time for a loser interview after that. So I think what she was doing is, if I don't talk first, I'm not going to talk. Joe probably wouldn't go to her at the end of a main event in the prelims when you want everybody pushing toward the pay-per-view main card. But still, that doesn't give you, too bad. You lost, you don't get an interview. That's the way it goes. You don't have any right to take the shine away from somebody else. And even though what she said wasn't disrespectful, that act is disrespectful. And so I get why people were, a little bit, I wouldn't, throw a fit over it, but I see why people were perturbed. Biggest upset in a long time. I don't remember seeing minus 1,000 ever. I'm sure it has happened. I haven't seen it. I don't usually pay that much attention to odds, but she was a crazy underdog. And you're going to take her moment away and get in and try to talk first? That's a little bit disrespectful to me.
I think it's one of those things where it sounds worse than it is. Like, as we project it, like as you just, described it there, it sounds worse than it actually was as it happened. But I also saw not only people that were upset that she would do this, but there was also people upset that Joe Rogan didn't go to her and say, no, this is not your opportunity to speak. And then, basically, there's no other way to put this, turned his back to her and visually, cued Roxanne to speak. Is that something where Joe should have? I mean, I'm torn, right? Like, even you said, hey, nothing like this had ever happened to you in the thousands of matches that you've called or you've went into interview. So it's not like there's a, process for this, right? We don't even
protocol
know
for it.
Right. Like, we don't even know that he knew this was going to happen. It was a very fluid moment. But I guess in hindsight, the instant that he knew she should have spoken, he should have done something to deter it. In case in point, and I did see a couple people actually bring this up, I believe Holm, after her win, which again we'll get to, had called him back, and said, I wanted to say one more thing. And Joe said, no, I think something to the effect of, I'm sorry, I pulled the mic back. You're probably much better versed in how those, dialogues have to go than I am. But naturally, fighters don't get a second chance to speak. So there was kind of also at the end of that night, an example of, hey, this kind of happened and we know it shouldn't have versus, why couldn't he just let Holly Holm say one more thing?
Here's the deal that a lot of people don't know, and I've been asked about this a lot. The first thing is, it's awkward. Now, I've never had this happen, but when she comes up to you and says, Macy Barber, and kind of cut off Joe and said, hey, I want to talk or whatever, it's awkward to go, no, and turn your back on her. And you don't know what she's going to say. And so there's this like moment of like, maybe she has something really important to say. Maybe she's going to, and is it visually worse to, as you said, turn your back on her and snub her in front of everybody? You don't want that awkward TV moment. As far as post-fight, I want to make this extremely clear, at least in my case, because I did a lot of television with commercials. Joe does not. It's a pay-per-view. The truck decides when that microphone is on and off. You can't turn it on and off yourself. It doesn't work that way. So I've been criticized for a fighter wanting to say something else and like, oh, why didn't you let him? The mic is dead. I don't control the truck in your ear is going last question. And you give them the last question, you walk off. The truck has already moved on to a video package that's about to play in 5 seconds. They can't stop it. Or they could stop it, but it would be weird. They've turned off your microphone a lot of the times. Not all the time, but a lot of the times. So if Joe had let her talk, it'd be into a dead microphone, and then a video package would start because they've already started that countdown. Joe could hear that some of the time in his ear, depending on who they're talking to. So a lot of times when you're interviewing a fighter, they go, okay, video package on Conor, 5, 4. So as you're walking away, that's what you hear in your head. If Holly Holm grabs that mic and says, but I want to, the microphone's dead, and that video package is going to start in 2 seconds. So Joe is doing what the truck is telling him to do. He's not in control of that. People act like it's up to me or Joe to decide how many questions. It isn't. When I walk in, a lot of times they'd say, hey, 2 questions. We got to move to this video package pretty quick. Main event, we got to get going. Make it quick. Okay, da-da-da-da. So when I do my 2 questions, the truck is already going, okay, cool, main event, Q, video package number 4. You're hearing all that in your ear. So he knew she couldn't talk if she wanted to. Or, hey, throw to John Anik. He's going to, promote the next pay-per-view or whatever the deal is. The truck has moved on. So visually, the camera's on me or it's on Joe, but we're not in the driver's seat here. The truck's in the driver's seat, and they kill your microphone. So don't blame Joe. Don't blame me. Don't blame the commentator for saying, hey, no, you can't ask him a question. The microphone's dead in your hand. So, and the audience at home doesn't know that.
So I guess in the most simplest terms, the truck was not telling Joe Rogan before he walked into the ring to see Roxanne and Macy, don't let Macy talk. But at the end of the Holly Holm fight, they were telling him, you've got 2 minutes for this interview, and then your mic is shut off.
Yes, there's a hard end. Now, they won't kill it in the middle of somebody talking. They're not going to say in 10 seconds we're turning off the microphone. But they'll say, hey, Jimmy, 15 seconds. We don't have a lot of time. So, yeah, the person might ramble and I'll get 17 or 18, but I've had producers in my ear like, dude, Jimmy, cut him off. And that's another awkward moment. I can't, yank the microphone away from somebody. It's awkward. So a lot of times producers will be adamant about timing, but you're like, dude, I can't push them away from the microphone, right? That looks terrible. And also that's another reason why, and people got mad at me, it was Czech Congo and I want to say King Mo, and he kept trying to take the microphone from me. And I kept saying, no, you can't. And he had it in, like, I'm holding it. He has it in his hands. He's talking and he kept trying to pull it from me. Give it to me. I said, no. I kept saying, you never let go of the microphone, because when my producer says, Jimmy, 15 seconds, and we're going to go to video package, and someone else has the microphone and they're going, da, 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 I can't button it. I can't finish it. And my producer would chew my head off, because I've lost control of the show. So you never give up the microphone if you can possibly avoid it. The one time I did to Joe Schilling, 2 things. He had told me what he was going to say beforehand, so I knew how long it would take. Secondly, it was a pre-recorded show. It wasn't live. So if they didn't like what he said, they could just cut it out. a live show, you can't give up the microphone, because if there are any timing issues, you can't help. You can't do what you need to do, because you know, it's like letting go of the wheel in a car. You can't steer it. So all those things are factors that people don't understand.
Well, now that we've let go of the wheel in terms of this recap, for the time stampers, 10:15 is when we actually start talking about the fight card. We're going to start. Yeah, that happens. We're going to start with Carlos Diego Fijera and Anthony Pettis. And you know what? To the people who say, make picks. I don't like making picks, nor do you for that matter, because it makes you look uneducated when you get the name wrong. You can get everything fundamentally right, but if you don't pick the right ending sequence, then it doesn't matter. It's literally like saying, here's everything that happens in the movie, and I got that right, but the ending was wrong. So to this point, we had looked at these two, and, Anthony Pettis really had been, for a short period of time, considered the future, the face of the UFC. Obviously, some ups and some downs, but this, in my opinion, was going to be, and is, the least high-profile loss on his record. And that's not taking anything away from Fijera. He's a great fighter. I just thought that, number one, Pettis offered a higher intelligent attack in striking and would be adept enough to not go to the ground. Yet, he chose to not do that, and the fight ended that very fashion. So, a neck crank / almost like rear naked throat choke and smash. He really didn't have a deep submission, but he had it tight, and it had to be uncomfortable on his jaw. This, to me, really signifies where Anthony Pettis can go from here. He'll always have name value. He'll always have marquee value. But unfortunately, the results aren't living up to the highlight packages.
Yeah, that's the killer. And the issue, too, is he had only lost, up until this point, 2 pretty big names. This is the first up-and-comer, wherever you put Carlos Diego Fijera, this is the first time he had lost somebody who wasn't top shelf name-wise. Clay Guida in his UFC debut. Guida at the time, remember, a very tough fighter who was tough, didn't have, and it was also Pettis' debut. Since then, it's been nothing but the best of the best to beat Pettis. And so that's a huge, huge, huge turning point for Pettis. And also on the ground, it looked like Fijera just owned him. Absolutely owned him. Pettis had shown a good guard. He had shown good submission skills, good scrambling and jiu-jitsu and all this stuff. And then Fijera easily took his back. It seemed like positionally, he just dominated him. And this might be a turning point in Pettis' career because of that.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like he got beat by just better fundamentals, and that's difficult to see on the ground, but it just looked like positions and transitions he was not able to defend because Fijera was just at a higher level on the ground, and we knew that going in, and that's why you don't put yourself in those situations. Going forward, though, I do want to say, and I mentioned in the pre-fight show, I can't wait to see Brian Kelleher's post-fight YouTube channel breakdown because this guy has got to be ecstatic. So I just want to give out, and I know this is probably to some going to be a horrible reference. When I was looking at Osborne's hype package, and he started to say like grandiose things like, they're going to say that I fought on the Conor, or, people are going to say Conor McGregor fought on my card. I'm thinking like, man, you're really putting yourself into an MVP cringe here if you don't pull this off. And if you go back and listen to our pre-show, the number one thing I said, and even you mentioned it as well, we needed to see Brian Kelleher's chin. We needed to make sure his chin was 100%. And I'll tell you, the first shot he took was heavy. He wore it well, and then he imposed his game plan. And as much as I like Osborne, and as much as I think, he has a million foot tall ceiling, we saw very clearly when his game plan does not work, when plan A does not work, there is no plan B back behind it. Now, he was tough. He held into a really bad position. He had to toe tap around it, and props to Brian Kelleher for letting go, even though the ref hadn't broke, even though he hadn't felled any tap. We don't traditionally see a foot being used to tap. This was a big win for Brian Kelleher, and in all the right ways. He did what he needed to do to show he was back in form. And to his credit, in post-fight, he admitted, hey, my back was against the wall. and this could have been my job. And I'll tell you, a lot of fighters, we're going to talk about one of the main event, seem to wilt when there's that type of pressure. Brian Kelleher did not wilt at all.
Yeah, and whenever you see that lift up, slamming, double leg, lift a guy to the moon, you know it's not going to work out well. It's just a great first step where you go, oh man, that's this dude just went for a ride. It can really take the heart out of a guy, a takedown like that. And that guillotine, as soon as he stepped over the legs, and it was briefly almost a mounted guillotine up against the fence, and when he sat back, it was done. So much confidence in his ability to finish that submission. I mean, once he was in good position, it was absolutely over. And that ground dominance, once he was on top, he seemed like the bigger guy, the stronger guy, the more fundamental guy. And in that position, he just completely owned him. I thought it was a great performance.
Yeah, I did too. And much respect for not, getting overtaken by the monster, right? There was a lot there for Brian Kelleher that he had to overcome. Wearing the big shot, going against a giant, underdog on the card, and literally didn't let any of it faze him. And combine that with knowing his job was on the line, period, getting thrust on the main card. Couldn't feel better for the guy. And honestly, Osborne's going to learn from this. If this isn't his trigger to get better and know that he can't, rest on all his talents, then this is probably the best thing could have happened to both fighters. Moving forward, Olynyk, Maurice Green. A little background story. I was very excited to see Olynyk start to use scarf holds. I've actually talked to Coach Mark Montoya a ton of times. I'm dependent on scarf holds and what I do here, and I knew that Maurice Green would be more than apt to them. And it's interesting, we don't see it a lot at the UFC level because they're just a little bit unorthodox. It's very hard to finish. To me, at least using it on a much lower scale, scarf holds are uncomfortable. It's a pressure, but it's not, I guess it's a suffocation rather than a choke, if that makes sense. You can get somebody that's not versed in grappling in a position like that, and they'll tap just due to the uncomfortableness of it. Like, you're really sunk in, you're in a guy's armpit. It's not a very pleasant feeling. You have a lot of weight and pressure on you, but at a high level like the UFC, you're just not going to find somebody that's going to tap to that. You're not physically restricting my airway enough. And we saw really a ground fight that we don't see often. Super, super exciting, 100% on the ground, because we knew Olynyk had burned his arms out. He looked like he'd burn his arms out, and he just got into positions where Maurice Green was just going to power through. And it was kind of that balancing scale. Was Maurice going to give? Was Olynyk going to have enough strength to finish submissions? And ultimately he did with a very good armbar, but a great performance for both guys. And one where, and we talk about these every so often, you look at a fight and neither fighter is going to lose any stock on this loss.
Yeah, I think that's generally true. Technically, the problem with the scarf hold position in jiu-jitsu, especially no-gi in MMA, is you pop your head out, you take the guy's back. And one of my favorite fighters of all time, Hayato Sakurai, he would get in trouble going for this head and arm throw, and when it wouldn't work, his opponents would take his back. And the thing about finishing that scarf hold position with a crank, and with that suffocation move, is it's a lot of energy. And not a lot of guys with halfway decent ground games are going to tap to that. Unless you have a real significant size or strength advantage. It's just a hard move to finish. I don't think I've ever tapped to that. Not a lot of guys have tried to pull it on me. It's you're not going to get a decent fighter with it. But it costs a lot of energy. And the key to this fight is, I thought Alexei Olynyk was winning on the ground, of course, but he was expending a lot of gas. And with that armbar at the end, if Maurice Green had been able to get out of that, I don't know if Olynyk would have had the gas to go through round 3 effectively. He was just going for a lot of moves that really spend a lot of energy, and he wasn't getting Maurice Green to tap. So he was in, to me, kind of a race against the clock with that armbar. If remember, it was toward the end of the second round. If the bell rings and I got to get up and I've spent a lot of energy trying to crank these submissions that didn't work, I saw Olynyk really gassing out. And great performance by him. He got the submission. That's what I predicted him doing, but a really inefficient performance. He was really tired at the end, and against somebody else who's got a little bit slicker ground game, who could have escaped those positions, he would have found himself in trouble in the last 5 minutes. He's got to correct that.
Yeah, I mean, we both technically did, predict it right in terms of what we laid out, but I will say Maurice Green did so much better in positioning and transitions. We thought, both of us, that Olynyk was going to show him something that he'd never seen before, that he wasn't prepared for. And the reality is, he was prepared for every single move. It's just ultimately he got to a position where one of them was going to work. I mean, with Olynyk, you're talking about a guy masterful in terms of the fights that he's had. He's just going to keep working for submissions till one of them hits. And it just so happened that one of them hit, but Maurice Green did a great job at defending a majority of them. There's no shame in getting armbarred by Alexei Olynyk.
Yeah. I mean, we saw an exciting heavyweight in a division with a lot of room in it. We saw someone I think who can have exciting fights against the right opponents and a little bit of schooling, and he can avoid these submission traps. And we saw a path forward in the heavyweight division for both guys, and that's important. You don't often see that.
All right. So we don't often take our viewers to task. We love you guys, and we appreciate every one of you that support us, whether it's Podbean, YouTube, like buttons. I don't care if you hate me and hit the dislike button just because I'm here. We really appreciate you guys. However, a lot of you really laid it on thick that we weren't all over Conor McGregor, that I don't even know how we apparently made a joke about the schmo. But listen, go back and listen to the pre-fight show. I kind of took a stab at Holly Holm and Raquel Pennington as a rematch that no one was clamoring for. Jimmy chuckled at it, and no one said a word. No one said how disrespectful we were to Holly Holm and Raquel Pennington. I just find that a little bit strange. However, when you look at this fight, Jimmy, man, it just seems so uninspired by both girls. And I know Holly's getting up there in age, and, as you'd mentioned, you don't know if she's got another run for gold in her. Raquel Pennington had a lot of weight in terms of trying to get back to where she wanted to be, and this fight has probably weighed heavy on her for years. But such an interesting reaction from the fans during this fight. They were booing Holly by going into clinch, which is what she needed to do. And then when Raquel would get separation, she would go initiate the same clinch that she knew wasn't working. It was such a odd fight to watch. It just seemed like neither fighter ever got into the flow. And the first fight they had, if they would have just repeated it, I think it still probably went on Holly's way. We both mentioned we saw Holly win that first fight, but it's so strange to see such a distinct contrast between two fights when really, the other thing is, I didn't see a lot of people talking about this rematch or asking for this rematch, but it did happen.
Yeah, and Holly Holm seemed like she didn't want to get hit. I mean, there's obviously, who wants to get hit? A fighter who wins the fight doesn't want to get hit. But it's a matter of she seemed almost paranoid about it. A lot of jabs, a lot of movement, a lot of those front teep kicks, a lot of range finders, and she seemed to want to dance on the outside or clinch the entire time. Didn't want to engage, didn't want to take any risks at all. And it led to, the most boring fight of the main card. And this is one of those things where Holly Holm has shown an inability to beat the elite of the elite. That I've been very vocal about that. I've called her the Buster Douglas of MMA. She had one great performance and nothing after that. She's lost decisions to some of the best, but she's never beaten any of them. But she can always beat the Raquel Penningtons of the world. The Betch Koheias, the mid-level talent, she can always beat those. But I don't see anyone after this fight going, God, can't wait to see her fight for a title again. I just don't see this moving her forward at all. Even if she had blown away Raquel Pennington, I would have said, okay, she can do that against middle-of-the-pack fighters. But we've seen her so many times fail against the elite. But to have a boring performance like this, that didn't have any emphasis, didn't have much excitement to it, I don't see where this gets her. And at this stage in your career, as you said, she's 38 years old. All right, you can still fight and make some money, I guess, but we've seen where your ceiling is. I don't think she gets past it.
All right, so the moment you've all been waiting for, 24-5 on the docket, is Conor and Cowboy. This is going to be one of those fights, man, I don't know what direction to take it. And as I'm watching it, I think I probably watched about 100 times now because I've had time to do that. And am I excited for Conor? Am I seeing the resurgence of Conor's career? Or am I seeing a further slide for Cowboy Cerrone? And listen, you can't take anything away from Cowboy Cerrone. This guy has been a mainstay in the UFC. We know it. Like, we saw the same packages last night as they were filling time. This guy is a surefire Hall of Famer. basically can put his name on the record book in a lot of aspects, but you can't get away from this, okay? When it comes to big fights, I don't care what anybody wants to say, whether it's mental or not. When it comes to big fights and big moments, more often than not, he has a problem. I don't know what it is. I'm sure he doesn't know what it is. I don't want it to happen. He doesn't want it to happen, but it happens. In this fight, Jimmy, he looked awful. There was absolutely nothing that he did offensively. And I'm not saying that Conor didn't come out with an excellent game plan with the shoulder chucks. I'm not saying that it wasn't going to work. It's a great way. And one of the things that no commentator I heard mentioned, what a great way to make up for that height disparity using those shoulder chucks against him. We haven't seen those shoulder chucks since John Jones used them. And I technically really don't like that as a tactic. I think it's a little dirty, but, whatever. It's almost to me similar to a headbutt in a way. I mean, you're taking a really hard part of your body and you're forcing it into someone else's head. I've never really liked it. If you've had it done to you, you'll probably know why. But at the same time, Conor overwhelmed him from the opening second. And then to Conor's credit, we talked about starting fast. We talked about fights that might end in the second or third. Conor never let his foot off the gas and just mauled him. Absolutely mauled him. And a great performance, I guess, to be fair, something the UFC needed if they're going to put any hype and power back behind the McGregor name, because, prior to this, we talked about a lot of transgressions, but on the other side, man, you can't look past this. The last 3 fights for Cowboy have been a TKO, a TKO, and a TKO, and it's looked like lesser and lesser every single time. Tony Ferguson, second round. Justin Gaethje, first round. 4 minutes in against Gaethje, like I said, and now you're not even making it a minute with Conor. I know people go back and say, hey, that Tony Ferguson was a doctor stoppage, but, man, Cowboy's eye looked bad right away as soon as he took the first chuck.
So many ways to go with this, and this is what, some people were mad at me last night on Twitter, if you saw. Let me pull it out so I can actually read it and actually,
call the right person out.
What happened. No, I'm not calling out anybody. I'm saying what I said. I tweeted, quote, "Man, I love Cowboy, but this deer in headlights and big fights tendency was in full effect tonight." People got mad at me. Some people thought I was minimizing Conor's performance. I wasn't doing that at all. Conor looked great. You can't get around that. His combinations were sharp, crisp, powerful, accurate. His timing was impeccable. His range was great. Cowboy was 0-1 officially with strikes. Apparently, he threw 1 strike and it missed. I couldn't tell you what that strike was. I've been hit with shoulder strikes many, many times in training and in fights. And I've seen guys hit with shoulder strikes. I've never seen them hurt a person. I've never seen them go, oh, wow. Well, he got hit with a thigh because he slipped the left hand from Conor. It ran into Conor's thigh. Then 3 or 4 shoulder strikes, and they broke apart, and Cowboy looked done. Done. Before Conor landed a punch, Cowboy looked done. Finished. Now, I know there are no opinions in MMA, right? Everybody's right or wrong, and you don't know anything about sport. Conor looked great. Cowboy looked bad. Where you put that on that scale is up to you as a fan, right? But you can't get away from both of those things. Conor looked great. Cowboy looked terrible. Did Conor's greatness make Cowboy look bad? That's the question. It made Eddie Alvarez look bad. It made Jose Aldo look bad. But Cowboy had a tendency to do this in previous fights. Conor is not the first guy to hit the gas early and devastate Cowboy. RDA walked through him. We talked about Justin Gaethje. It's one of those things where that's happened to him before. Darren Till, regardless of those were all, excellent opponents, but Cowboy's done this before where he can't pull the trigger. And, when they broke away and those shoulder strikes clearly hurt him, his eye was swollen up a bit. That's time to hit the F it button. F it. Throw that combination. Throw that kick. Whatever. I'm already hurt. We're at distance. I'm not going to get another shot here. And you didn't throw a jab. So Conor looked great. Cowboy looked bad. How much credit you want to give to each guy, that's up to you as a fan. But Cowboy looked awful, and Conor looked great. Has a lot of options moving forward. I don't think Khabib is a great fight for him still. I think stylistically that's just a bad matchup. I'd rather see the Masvidal fight. But that is what it is. Once again, Conor looks great in a big fight, and Cowboy couldn't pull the trigger. That was the story of it to me.
The problem I have with anyone, and listen, if I disagreed with you, I would say it right now. I mean, we have no qualms about disagreeing. Here's the problem. This fight to me goes down a lot like the Aldo fight did. There's not a whole lot to tell about Conor, okay? Could this happen 1,000 times out of 1,000? No. Could this happen 5 to 10? Maybe. With Cowboy, could it happen 200 times out of 1,000? Yeah, I'll give him that. But when we talk about what's next for Conor, let's take this fight right here, and let's say he goes against Gaethje, goes against Ferguson. I don't think anyone's going to take this fight and say, rack Khabib back up, okay? If Conor were to go have a poor performance, people will point back at this fight, probably the same people that chastise you, and say, well, we didn't learn a lot from him in Cowboy fight. So it's funny to me when people look at performances like this, where it's distinctly one-sided Conor, they put him up on a pedestal, yet those same people don't tend to take that and use it in the inverse way in the bad performances and say, well, we didn't see a whole lot. And I think that's what, as a fan, I wanted to see. I wanted to see a full, at least round out of Conor to see where he was, judge how he bettered himself from the loss or humbled himself. We wanted to see it. And the problem is, as you said, you have a strange dynamic. Was Conor just that great? Was Cowboy just that bad? Or, in my opinion, was it just the blending of the two that ended this result? And you can't give Conor enough credit to suffice the people that love Conor. You can't give Cowboy enough bad publicity for the people that don't like Cowboy, which are few and far between. It's just a very strange dynamic. But at the end of the day, I would hate to say it, if we could go back to the pre-fight show, talk about all the things we did, one of the things I really failed to think about was, what if Conor comes out, House of Fire, 200 miles an hour, and Cowboy comes out stuck in neutral? Could this not have been the result? In hindsight, it makes total sense, right? I mean, we've got guys.
You know what we did, and I really thought about this morning. I don't mean to cut you off, but you know what we did? We hoped. A lot of people didn't talk about Conor could hit the gas and blow Cowboy away before he even knows what's happening. I thought of it. You thought it. We knew it could happen. But what did we do? Like you said, we hoped we'd get around, right? We hoped Cowboy would at least throw something and we would see a good round and a half of action and see where Conor really is. And maybe Cowboy lands some shots and we go, okay, well, we still got a chin or whatever, goes for a takedown and tests his takedown defense so we can see how we do against Khabib. We got none of that. Partly because we didn't want this kind of fight. Even if you're a Conor fan, if you're a drooling Irish flag waving I love Conor McGregor guy, I think you'd want more than this. You'd want Conor to have to fight for a minute or two to see where the guy is. So, in a sense, one of the reasons I think, although we knew it could happen, we didn't focus on it, is we didn't want it to happen. We wanted a little bit more from Cowboy to show us exactly where everybody is, to answer some of these questions. So this result, even if you're a Conor fan, has to be a little bit unsatisfying because a lot of questions are left unanswered.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect way to put it. In fact, if you want to take it that way, a lot of the things that we did to self-justify this not being the result. Oh, Conor seems humbled. Conor had a press conference where he didn't do all his Conor things. He didn't do his Billy walk into the cage. All the things you could put into that. People are so willing to take it and use it as fuel as you're just a Conor McGregor detractor or you don't like Conor. I love Conor. I think Conor is one of the best things that can happen for this sport. He brings a lot of notoriety, attention, eyes, sales. People know when a Conor McGregor fight happens. But I'm not here because I just want to watch a Conor McGregor fight. I'm here because I love the sport of MMA. and things like this don't always build the best backbone going forward for future fights, because there's not a lot to take from here. And I hate to say it, you can take all those positives and turn them right against Cowboy. I don't want to see Cowboy in another main event. I love him. I respect him. I drove hours upon hours upon hours to watch him fight. But I'm sorry, when he doesn't show up, he doesn't show up. And I don't want to see a one-sided fight like this. I want to see something competitive. I want to see balance. And I can't always write it off as, well, one guy was just so good and the other guy was just so bad.
Yeah, you hate seeing it, but we're still kind of, the good thing, it's the best outcome for the UFC. It's the best outcome from the sport, for the sport in general, in terms of money making and exposure and all these things. It sets up some interesting options when it comes to either Khabib or Masvidal or Gaethje, whoever they set up next. Probably not Gaethje, for Conor. So I mean, there are a lot of paths moving forward. I would have liked, as a tactician, as someone who studies the nuts and bolts of this all the time, I would have liked more answers.
And overall, I mean, let me just say, a lot of people, including us, we're a little down on this card, okay? And I love to be wrong. We've mentioned it before. I love to be wrong about MMA. I love to be wrong about fight predictions because it entertains me. And at the end of the day, we're here for a little bit of entertainment as much as we want to analyze it. When you can look at a card where you've got a huge underdog like Brian Kelleher come out and win, you've got a card where Alexei Olynyk really puts in a dramatic performance, you've got a card where you look at Conor McGregor just absolutely walk through somebody in 40 seconds. That's what the sport needs. That's a great card. That shows you in a nutshell everything you want in an event. So it's kind of also one of those reminders. You can't always judge these things, before they start. And not to say that that's what we always did, but a lot of people were down on this card. Listen, there's no belt. Some of these fights were kind of thrown together just by the nature of when they were positioned. A lot of these fighters, man, people forget they've got families, okay? They just got off of Christmas. They just got off of New Year's. Nobody wanted to go through a fight camp for all that, okay? They wanted to spend time with their family. They work very hard. They spend a lot of time away from the family to begin with. So you were kind of pushing a card together around this Conor fight, which again, truthfully didn't have a lot of significance in the history of MMA. But at the same time, I thought every penny was well spent on this fight.
It was a very entertaining card. Glad I watched it. And the main event gave us a lot to talk about, and it's going to be a lot to talk about for a long time.
Well, I don't know if this was a longer show or if we just spent so much talking about the Macy Barber issue in the beginning, but I'm looking at the time, almost double what we normally do. So anybody that made it here and didn't shut it off because they thought we were being mean to old Conor, we appreciate you, and we will be back very shortly with more commentary.